Hey everyone, today I'm going to walk you through making 150 koi pond soaps, or at least my process of that. You're not going to see me individually make 150 soaps. At the end of the video, you will see, with some really bad camera work, you'll see a spread of all 150, actually plus a few more because I made a few extra. That's what I do just to ensure in case something goes wrong, I have something to replace it with and still have my full order created. There is a short video on my channel that shows each individual soap, a little flash of it, and so you can get the idea of how different and unique they all are. And I may do a slower version of that down the road. All I'm doing right now is slinging a little soap, one with titanium dioxide, the black one using activated charcoal. Both of those are dispersed in glycerin and then slung in little bits. The angle and the speed at which I'm slinging this soap makes a difference in how the pattern comes out. If I'm slinging it a little slower, you get more cow spot kind of looking. And here you see me going a little faster. I didn't change the speed, although this is at double the speed because I'm a slow mover. But the faster speed you saw at the end there gives you a little bit more like a tiger stripe look to the soaps. Right now I'm using Pumpkinhead from Mad MICAS. Most of the colorants I use are from Mad MICAS in this. And you'll see some different shades of orange because I do also use Tangerine. Is it Tangerine Dream? I'm not sure. I will put the colorants I use in the description. But I use a couple of other shades because I did want them to all be unique. Even while the spots are obviously going to look different, but I did some solid color ones. I did a big, large variety. The customer really wanted variety. I'll talk a little bit more about why I'm making these down the road. This wasn't a wholesale order. It was a special order for an event. You'll learn more about that down the road in a follow-up video. I don't want to say too much about it because the event hasn't happened yet when you're, well, at least at the point that I'm filming this. So there will be a follow-up and you'll get to see more information and some reactions to the soaps. So I'm just pouring these in. It doesn't look like it because I edit it to not make you wait around all day while soap dries, but I did allow the soap to dry between the slinging of the white and the black and the pouring of the orange. I'm pouring these fairly hot. I think I poured around 130. For my soap, that's fairly hot. I'm using Crafter's Choice, and the melting point is about 125 for this soap. And so I'm going about 5 degrees above that. Your soap may be different, and the melting point of your soap is very important. You'll hear me talk about that a lot. If you've seen any of my videos, I do kind of harp on that because it can make or break your soap. If you pour it too hot, you're going to melt the colors underneath, the embellishment colors that go down first. Always make sure if you're doing a soap like this that what you want to see is poured on the top of your soap is poured first. That's why I started with the black and the white. I do, like I said, I do a huge variety of these because it was asked for. So you'll see an orange later that is Tangerine Dream, I think. I'll post the colors. I hope I'm not repeating myself. I'm exhausted. This order would take most people about half the time it took me. I do have to take a long time. I've got some back issues. I have to stop and rest in between. I had other things going at the same time. When I started this order was just about when I also started this YouTube channel. So, yeah, there's been a lot on my plate. about 3 months, 3.5 months. And that's after I got the products that I needed to order to fulfill this order. So, shipping time and all that fun stuff. But I've been working diligently in between and amongst the other things that I do. And the order is in shipment right now on its way to my fantastic customers, because really found them easy to work with. At the top of this picture here, you see the kind of variety I have. There's more to come, and you'll see that in a little while. When I start putting them all together, you'll see more of them. But I really tried to mix it up. I wanted to give them what they asked for, which was variety. I also didn't just randomly say, oh, I think I'll do a white koi soap with orange on top. No, I did a deep dive, because that's kind of what I like to do. If I'm doing something that's semi-realistic, I want it to be as real as possible. So I looked up a large variety of koi fish, a lot of YouTube videos that showed different varieties, showed the rare types, showed, the ones that are the most precious to those who collect them, or are fascinated by them and enjoy them. It's a big deal for people who are really into koi ponds and breeding koi. I guess collecting is the wrong word, but or stocking their koi ponds, and many of them are breeders, and you can't always control what comes out with that, but that's why there are some that are just really rare types. You just don't see them as often. And I've included a few of those in here. I tried to make it similar to what you might find in nature or within breeding projects or programs. So now we're on to the water lilies, because my koi pond soaps have a water lily and a water pad floating on the top of the soap. We have Flirt from MICAS for this, and I do these soaps, as you'll start to see. Oh, there's my first mess of the day, of the video, I should say. If you have not seen me before, I am not a neat soaper by any means. I end up slopping soap quite a bit. And that's just the way it happens for me. If I were to try to be neat, I'd be so anxious that you would never see soap from me. And I am all about the artistry, and I do like to have a certain amount of control over the soap. So you'll see that I use a lot of techniques that can kind of accommodate my messiness, let's just say. And I have learned to clean things up, alter things when they do get a little messy, like the scraping of the little koi molds that you saw. I wasn't worried about having too much soap pour in that mold, because I knew I was going to trim it by using a knife. Very carefully, mind you. If you choose to do something like this, make sure that you have studied. Oh, the lights came on. Look at that. I forget what technical difficulty we were having this day, but the lights came on. So now you can see the color a little bit better. That's more true to the Flirt mica that I'm using. But, so back to the trimming. I was talking too much over the pouring of the koi soap, so I didn't mention it. But if you're using a knife to trim a little embed mold, it's better to do it. It's easier to do it while it's still in the mold. And just make sure you point your knife, the sharp edge of the knife, away from you. If you have not ever studied any knife technique for carving or anything like that, you don't want to aim the knife at yourself, at your body, at your fingers. Make sure it's all going away from you. These are just thin sheets of soap. You've seen me do this before for other projects, I believe. It's not quite the same technique as when I'm pouring for my chiffon soaps, my chiffon technique, because I want a little bit more control over the thickness, and I I need a little to learn to get a little more control over the level of my table. It's not level. You'll see it shake an awful lot in here because it is where I'm filming is not the ideal place for making soap, but it is the ideal place for filming. And so I'm working on a card table. So anytime I put just the littlest amount of pressure on it, you'll get a little bit of a table quake. So that's what's happening here and in several other places in this video. These little cutters that I'm using to create the water lilies are fabulous. They were so cheap. I don't remember how much I paid for them, but I found them on Amazon. If you want to find something similar, I can't guarantee you can find the same thing, but these are fondant cutters. You might find some of the same things under Fimo or what's the other name? Sculpey, some of the baked or bakeable clays that people use for different art projects. A lot of those cutters are the same or the same brands even. People just use them for the same thing, same types of projects. Looking up mini cutters helps because the size is important if you're doing something really small. Especially if you're looking to create embeds for a soap that fit in a soap mold or on a soap mold, the size does matter. So that's why I tend to search, if I'm searching on Amazon or Etsy or anything like that, for mini cutters or mini embed molds or mini molds, mini silicone molds, and you'll find some small ones. Now, that being said, you have to look at the dimensions. Sometimes they can be too small for you to work with. I've worked, and I'll do a separate video on it, but I do work with some extremely tiny embed molds, the silicone molds especially, as small as the smallest of the flowers you're going to see me cutting. And they're quite tiny, but it's a kind of a learned skill. And I'll show some tips on that down the road. This is the medium portion of the flower. These flowers my water lilies are 3-layer. You could stop here. You could do 2 layers. You could do 1 layer. This is art, and you could do what you want. Whatever reminds you of a water lily. You don't have to have a water lily. You could find a different flower if you want a flower. You might not even want one. But this is my take on a koi pond style soap, which are pretty popular because I don't know, they just look so zen. They're very calming and relaxing to see the koi, which is why people put koi ponds. They're very relaxing and soothing. I don't own a koi. Oh, there's my little fun flower trick. It does it again. I couldn't. When I did that, I said to myself I could never do that again in a million years. And look right there. I just kind of set it down, not intending to, but it's set up on its side. And I think it happens with one of the other flowers later. Very strange because there's not a lot of thickness to that soap for it to stand up like that. So anyway, I just added, boy, I'm rambling today, but this is a very long video, so you're going to hear me ramble a lot. Hopefully the information will be useful for you. The way I got that shade, and I was talking over it, but I just added some titanium dioxide to the original color. So you're getting a lighter shade of the same color, and you're going to see me do that again in a minute for the center of the water lilies. And all I'm doing to shape them is putting a little pressure in the center, not a lot, but a little bit. First I used my thumb for the larger one, and then for these, oh yeah, I guess I'm using my thumb again. I thought I used something else, but maybe not. Oh, that's the tiny ones. So more titanium dioxide because now I want them even lighter. It just gives dimension to the flower. You could probably make them all the same color and they would be just as pretty. But I wanted to give it a little bit of dimension. For these, where I put the pressure in the center so I can kind of curl those petals up without them breaking off, for this one I used, it's very strange. It was sanitized, so don't come at me, but it's the lid of an old eyeliner pencil that I had. Just one of those crank up pencils, not one that you sharpen, so there's not a bunch of gunk all over it. And it was cleaned thoroughly and sanitized. So it was the right shape for me. You could maybe find a really skinny pen that could do the same thing. I couldn't find one thin enough, and that happened to work. So if you just try bending them up, you're gonna break them off. You need to have something that can put a little bit of pressure going the opposite direction of how you're bending the petals. So we're moving on to the water lilies. I'm sorry, from the water lilies to the lily pads. And these are much more simple. They're a 1-layer deal, and I just add a small detail to them. I have, you're gonna see me. You won't see the fail part of it, but there is a fail part of it. I just didn't show it in here. I only lost a couple of them. I had a really good idea. Wanted to create some variety with the lily pads as well. So I have, and you don't see all of the ones I made on this video. Obviously, we'd be here for hours or days. But you see me adding a variety of colors, and I'm going to mix them and I'm going to swirl them a little bit because I wanted it to look kind of modeled like leaves and lily pads can sometimes be. And I love the initial look. It comes out so cool, but I was like, the Chartreuse, that's the yellow or green you see being poured there, looked a little more yellow than I wanted. Part of that was just the fact that I was working in a hot pink pan, in my opinion. The first color you saw me pour was Mint Julep. Both of those are from MICAS. I am an affiliate and have an affiliate link in my description, and we'll get a small percentage of anything you purchase through that link. So I wanted to blue it up a little bit more. I wanted to add some swirls of blue in to kind of go opposite the Chartreuse. And it's going fine. And then right about here is where I should just leave it alone. And I don't. And I keep going and I keep going. And it's still even fine up to here. But the more I keep messing with it, then the soap starts to set up. And what happens is you get a distinctive line that starts to set up, an empty line where there might be a little bit of soap, but it's kind of like a crack. It's hard to explain, but it's a weak spot in the thin sheet of soap. And so I lost a couple of the prettiest ones actually, to that crack once I pushed the little mini cutter that I use down into the soap. It just split right in two when it went across that line. So I'd say I lost like 3 or 4 out of that, but they were the prettiest ones, so I was a little sad and mad at myself because I knew it as I was going. I was like, stop, Terry, stop messing with it. But I didn't. I tend to sometimes go too far. But someday I'll learn my lesson. And this little cutter, even though it's not the same plunge type cutter, it was in the same set that I bought when I got those flowers. It might have even been called a cake decorating set. I'm not sure. Or mini cookie cutters can sometimes work for finding good shapes that you can work with. They're really reasonably priced, and they're just plastic, but I haven't had one break on me yet. And I put some pretty hefty pressure on these. I make the soap sheets as thin as I can, depending on the look I want, because you don't want to try to break through like a 1/2 inch of soap with these. That's too much. Maybe if you had metal ones that you might be able to get to cut through that much soap. They're a little sharper and a little sturdier. But these, I wouldn't want to push it through more than not even a 1/4 inch of soap. So this is, I aim for about an 1/8 of an inch to a 1/16 of an inch thick. And when my table's not level, you'll find some of them are harder than others to cut out because one end was a little thicker with soap. But I got them all done. Got them all cut out. I'm using my fingers to push through to make sure it gets all the way through because just pushing on the table was a bit much. So I line up about 3 of them here and make sure they're lined up, and then I just cut out a little section. This has kind of a little scalloped edge on this cutter, this soap, the leaf that comes out. or could even be a flower. I don't know. But it looks to me like a lily pad, and looks even more like a lily pad when I cut out a little portion of it that looks like the split leaf that you frequently see in some types of lily pads anyway. And here I'm just doing a really quick demo of what they look like when I put them all together. I don't show it on camera, and it wasn't on purpose. I meant to film it and then just didn't end up doing it. I pieced together both all 3 layers of each water lily, and then with the onto the lily pad itself, just by gluing, not with glue, but with hot clear soap, each layer together. And you just, I did, if the layers, I didn't do it on the water lilies, I didn't score it, because it really don't feel like it needed it. But I did score the lily pads where I wanted to put the flower on it so that it was sure to stick well. The lily pads had been kind of, nobody in melt and pour soap likes to say that they cure soaps, but soaps can be cured that are melt and pour. It just basically means allowing moisture to be removed from them. And even in humid Florida where I am, I sometimes can cure my soaps. I don't do it every time. It depends on what I'm making. But I find that embeds can use a little drying time before you start placing them in. I'll talk a little bit more about that when I start to put these completely together, because you want the soap that you're pouring to be hot enough to stick to the next layer, but again, not melting it and not melting your embeds. And I have several tips for that in this process coming up next. But first of all, let me tell you, I'm pouring my first layer. This is the sand. I'm using, I think I showed it. Yeah, the detergent-free oatmeal soap from Crafter's Choice. And then I added apricot seed powder and a little Sparkle Sunshine. That's my favorite way to make sand. I make a lot of beachy things living in Florida, and having grown up here, I was born and raised here, so I have a big fondness for beach-themed things, beach and Florida themed soaps and decor. Just kind of who I am, even though I don't make it out to the beach very often. The apricot seed powder does add a little bit of exfoliation, but it's only in this layer. So the rest is all clear, basically clear soap. But it does also add the speckles that look like that you see it frequently in the sand. I think it's a great look for it. So what you're seeing me put in this soap here, these 2 colors of soap, these are the crystal clear, premium crystal clear soaps. And I divided it into 2. I did not do this with every dozen I made. Each dozen, I made them by the dozens. But I'm using the Zenicolor. The other ones I used mica, and I just used very little of it and a very vibrant color so that it showed up. There's the Zenicolor. And to make that shade of blue, you do want to add a little bit of the purple to it. Otherwise, it's going to be aqua. And I did do a few with aqua, but in wanting kind of a swirly modeled look on these, I wanted the green to show up as green, as more, I guess, more of a contrast to the blue. And so the aqua was a little too close to it for me. And when I added a little bit of the purple, or violet, I think is what they call the color, but it's a pinkish purple, and it creates a little bit more of a vibrant blue and less of an aqua blue or cerulean, or I'm not even sure what you call that shade. But anyway, I double pour it. I pour it really hot. I pour it as hot as I can take it for my soap. I think I poured these about 133, maybe 135. And you just pour it at the same time, or one and the other very quickly. And the trick to some of this is you have to spritz immediately. You don't want to spritz like crazy because you'll disrupt the layers from adhering. If you have a big, huge layer of alcohol floating on top when you go to pour the next thing, it's going to not set up properly, and you'll have some weird looking little layers. But this one, I know earlier I said I was allowing each thing to set up, even if it's time jumping and forwarding through my breaks. This one, after I let the blue and green layer set up, I did let that layer set up. But after that, this is what I like to call a fluid layer. That means I'm pouring a little bit, very hot. And you see I'm very quickly spritzing the koi, because at this point, that's what would matter if it melted. It's not going to matter if a little bit of that blue or green melts. It's going to mix in. It's not going to do enough to make a big difference. But having that embed in there, not wanting to melt the embed, I'm pouring a very small amount and quickly spritzing just enough to cool it off, so that the koi fish isn't sitting in 133 or 135 degrees soap. Keep in mind, as you pour, the soap in the mold and the soap in the bucket is going to be cooling a little bit. So you'll see as I get toward the end, I add a little more, but I'm still spritzing the koi fish every time. And my goal when I'm doing this clear layer is to make sure that it goes to the edge, to the very edge of the soap, so I'm not getting funky sides. And I try to take it over the top fin of the soap, of the fish, but it doesn't always work out that way, because you want to leave enough space at the top to properly, well, at least the way my design is, to properly add the water lily and lily pad. I like the lily pad to be sunk just a little bit and the water lily looking like it's floating on the top. It basically just kind of covers the lily pad. I think it makes it adhere better, easier to wrap, easier to use. And it still looks like it's floating on top of the water. And that's the image you get from it. So I have to leave enough room for that, but I do like to try to get the fin covered if I can, because that layer is so thin when I'm pouring to add the water lily and lily pad. Goodness. It's so thin that it has to be poured extremely hot, again, around 135. And so that fin is so thin, it's just a little bit of soap. And some of them that have the white or the black, it's going to melt a little easier because it has the extra glycerin in it that will melt, if you're not careful, faster than regular melt and pour on its own. So I really try hard to get it as covered as I can. And then I just spritz quickly again when I put the last layer on. So I'm scoring here. This is the only time I'm really, other than the lily pads attached to the water lilies. Those are hard to say fast. Do that like, water lily pad over and over again. You're going to have a hard time too. So other than that, this is the only place I'm scoring. And that is just to give those two flat surfaces, the last layer of clear and the water or the lily pad, a place to attach, just to make sure it attaches well. It should, because then I drop one, but I kind of sink it a little bit so it should stick. And you'll see here I go back over the top. If there's a bunch of the lily pad sticking out, I just want it to lie under that top layer. So you see me go back sometimes, and I'm dripping just a little bit around it just to make sure it's secured really well. I did take the time to match up the lily pads the water lilies, to match them up with the colors that I liked for the fish. I did divide it so that I had 4 of each color there. I just used 3 colors on the water lilies. That was what was requested. And I wanted a variety, so I wanted to alternate. I didn't want to have all of the yellow fish with all blue water lilies. I wanted to mix it up a lot. So I did take the time to kind of carefully choose which was going with which fish, which water lily was going with which fish. And when something interesting, when you see me spritzing after I put the right here, it makes the soap. I've said this before with some of the other, with embed pouring and other things. Spritzing not only cools the soap and helps it set up with the other soap, it also makes soap move. So it helps the liquid layer of soap that I'm putting that in. It helps it cover that lily pad. You'll see sometimes, well, if you go back, you might see that when I'm spritzing it, it suddenly looks like more soap is coming up on the lily pad. And it is, because it's helping the soap to move. Wow, that was a lot to get out in one big breath, it feels like. So I'm just revealing here the set that I made for you in this video. And after that, I'm going to reveal one more set that I made off camera just to show you a little bit of the variety and give you an idea of the different types I made. This isn't really a hard soap. It is complicated or complex, I guess is a better way to put it. There's lots of working parts to it. But it really isn't anything that's super difficult. As long as you know the temperature of the base that you use and watch that melting point and know when you should, how hot you should pour it. I don't think I said when I was adding the lily pads and the water lily, that last layer there, I do allow the fluid layer where I was pouring and pouring and pouring and pouring in little bits and trying to avoid melting the koi. I let it set up either fully or mostly fully. When you saw me go back and score, it's usually fairly set up, maybe not enough set up to take it out of the mold. You might squish through, but it's got a really good solid layer on the top before I add that last layer. 2 reasons. Well, really mostly one. If you add the lily pad before that, it's just going to sink down. If you're pouring another hot layer of soap over top of it, it's going to sink down or it's going to create bubbles. It's going to cause all kinds of messes. Now, a few bubbles in a soap like this, I don't think matters. If you have a lot of bubbles, it will obscure the clarity. You won't see the fish as well. You won't, it just won't have the look of clear water. But if there's a couple of little bubbles in there, it's a fish in water. So, I mean, you can expect to see a couple of bubbles. I really didn't end up with a lot in these, though. I mean, you could even add a couple on purpose if you wanted to play around with that kind of technique, which I don't go into in this because I don't do it. Here I am again cutting. You do see me pulling toward me, so it's kind of sounds like I'm being hypocritical, but I have done a lot of work with carving and in particular with slippery type objects like this. I've carved plastic for years, and so I'm really in control of that knife when I'm doing it. I'm putting more pressure the opposite way and more movement of the soap, even though it doesn't really look like it. So I definitely know how to avoid cutting myself while trimming these. And so it's just something I've gotten used to and have a lot of experience with. I don't recommend that you do that. If you are a really neat soaper, unlike me, you might not end up with soap around the edges like I do. That is part of me being sloppy, and that's just part of it. That's part of who I am. And so I also know that I can trim the soaps. Now, this isn't a soap you can trim in the mold as easily because of the water lily. So something sticking up out of that kind of takes that little tip away. But then again, I'm usually only using that tip for really small silicone molds or really small little embeds. So that's one. And I will do a whole video on that because there are some really good tricks and tips for getting those to look really spectacular. and not breaking them and not bending them, not having them fall apart on you when you're trying to remove them from the mold. You see, I did a weird thing. I kind of scored the pour over there, the spillover. That's because when I'm removing a soap and it's fresh like this, and I've got to keep going with more soaps, I've got to keep it moving, and it's fully set up, but it's still fresh. It's not a smart idea to try to pull off soap that is attached to a very thin layer on the top. You might end up removing the layer because it still needs a little setup time. I feel like sometimes when you find layers falling apart, sometimes you're just doing things too soon. Let it set up a little longer before you slice it if you're doing a layered soap. Let it set up a little longer before you try to manipulate it if you have to manipulate it in some way. The cutting kind of takes that out of it. But if you just tried to rip that off, I don't feel like that would be really smart. I didn't have any of these give me a fit, but I wasn't pulling on them. So I scored around it, and then while it was in the mold, scored so that as I pulled it out of the mold, it wasn't tugging on that top layer. And then just trimmed it with a knife, and they were really well set up by the time I wrapped them all. It was extreme. I was very confident in how adhered the layers were. Real quick, this sounds really silly, but I want to apologize for the way my voice sounds today. Just allergies. I'm starting to get kind of scratchy. So here, this is over 150 Koi Pond soaps. The reason it's over, I think I said earlier, I like to make extra. Just in case, if something were to go wrong, if I were to pour too hot and melt one of the kois, I wouldn't give that to my customer. So I always make a few extra. I'm not saying how many extra I made, because I put a challenge out there in my short. I wanted people to see if they could count how many extra I made. 150 was the order, and there's more than that here. So this is just what they look like laid out on a table. The table's not dirty, it's just old. So I apologize for that. Here's just some close-ups of a few of these. The little gold one was very special. I just made that as kind of a bonus little special soap. I don't know, if you're doing a large order, I think it's kind of fun to throw in a little extra unique one here and there. There was one, just past one, that looked a little bit like the stripes to me. There's a very spotty one, but those are smaller spots. Notice that you can see all the way down to those little grains of apricot seed powder. There's one that looks like a tiger stripe, sort of. He almost looked like he had a patch on. He was a pirate fish. But you can see all the way through. It's very clear. I hope that the video was clear, and I hope that you enjoyed it and got something from it. Thank you. Bye.